Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we are reviewing this. This is the Google Nest Wi-Fi Pro. It is the brand's first Wi-Fi 6E router, and I know a number of you are looking at this device as either the next step in your Google Home smart automated setup in your home or office environment, or this is the first time you've been considering getting a Wi-Fi 6E router, thinking about future-proofing, and you have been looking at this. Now, it's worth highlighting immediately, this is not the only Wi-Fi 6 router on the market. This device knocking around in a 1, 2 and 3 pack purchase kind of package there. You can get 1 unit for $199, 2 units for $299, and 3 units for $399. And again, that price is probably going to change pretty quickly, but that's the RRP. But it's by no means the only 6E router in the market. Wi-Fi 6E routers have been knocking around online for more than a year, even though Wi-Fi 6E as a supported kind of wireless protocol is by no means heavily available. To put it into perspective, if you get some of the latest Google phones, like even this one, this is the Google 6 Pro, we're going to refer to that later in the video, a 6 Pro, a lot of these are Wi-Fi 6. There are not a lot of Wi-Fi 6E devices out there. So when you are looking at this router, future-proofing is that key word there. And although we are going to measure this router up in a number of ways, we're going to look at the hardware, we're going to look at the software and all of that in this video, I think it's really, really important to remember that this is being marketed as a Wi-Fi solution with future-proofing built in there. So what we'll do, first things first, let's get this out of the box. And again, you can see I've not opened it yet. It only arrived here in the studio a short while ago. I get that out of there. And again, the system, I've got the single unit here. I didn't go for the mesh kind of collection because again, I personally don't need this. This has not been supplied by Google. This has come out of my own pocket here. So straight away on that inside retail box, there is the unit. And the first thing that's hitting me about that, when you look at all the marketing materials that Google have put out there on this device, and they are, very slick, very nice, lots of people relaxing, the Wi-Fi knocking around in the background, it looks smaller than what I'm seeing here. Again, we will refer to it later on, but that is definitely larger than I thought it was going to be. To put it into perspective, there you go, there's a shallow hard drive there. It's quite a decent little size. A lot of the images I saw online kind of indicating that it wasn't going to be as big as it is. If we carry on with the contents of the retail package there, we've got our quick start installation guide there tucked into the top to give us real-time information about setting the device up. And we've got an external PSU tucked into the bottom there. And this external PSU is a 22 watt external PSU there. Again, doesn't look too proprietary, but it's certainly not your standard 2-pin stuff. And that's a 2-meter cable as well. And then finally, at the bottom, we have got an Ethernet cable there, a 2-meter white Cat 5e Ethernet cable there. And that's really it for your snazzy, splashy little retail box there. So we'll remove all of that. We'll get rid of the manual information there on the first time setup, and you've got to use Google Home for it. And information on the 2 years warranty, something I really like because a lot of the routers I've been looking at here on the channel, and lots of them arrive with just 1 year of warranty, which in this current climate of hardware and things being released with firmware day one patches, I've got to tell you, 2 years of warranty is long overdue, and I'm quite pleased that Google have at least committed to that. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to be making peppered comparisons against another Wi-Fi 6E router that is kind of grabbing exactly the same market that the Nest Pro here is going for, and that is the Amazon Eero and their Pro series router, that 6E router. Now that one arrives at a much higher price point for each of the individual units. It also arrives with 1 year of warranty. So straight away, at a cursory glance, I'll tell you right now, this is winning. But throughout this video, there's going to be a lot of give and take there. But before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about the hardware there. So inside this device is a dual-core 64-bit ARM processor. I'll be honest, the lighting in this studio is playing havoc with that snow gloss white external there. It looks very floaty. And again, it's ever so slightly larger than I anticipated it being. On the side there, you can kind of get some idea of the depth. There isn't any passive ventilation, I'll say that much. And presumably, thanks to the lower ARM CPU inside there, and it's not having external antennae and dealing with kind of greater than gigabit LAN, so we'll get onto a bit, it's kind of understandable there isn't any kind of passive cooling on that. To put that into perspective, recently I've been reviewing a couple of Synology routers. That's the Synology RT6600AX, and it's absolutely covered in vented cooling. Same goes for their newer release there, that other Synology one there, the WRX560. Both Wi-Fi 6 routers, and both of them with a lot of passive ventilation there. So to have something this small supporting Wi-Fi 6E, arguably a more aggressive Wi-Fi coverage with that additional band we're entering into, it kind of really surprises me there isn't any kind of passive ventilation. Now, alongside that, it also arrives with 1 gig of memory internally for handling and 4 gig of internal eMMC storage inside there for the OS while running. Obviously, this is designed to be integrated with your existing home network there. So again, it supports Matter and Thread, as well as obviously integrated with a number of different Google Home services and support via that mobile app, of course. But at the same time, this is not, I repeat, not backwards compatible with the previous generation. That is, you know, a cracking shame. If you own the Google Nest, the original Google Nest, the previous version, or Google Wi-Fi, which were backwards compatible, this is not. So upgrading to this is going to be a more expensive proposition. What I mean by that is, if you already have a Google router mesh network in your home or business, it's got lots of little nodes knocking around, this device cannot be slid inside there. You can't replace your primary router with this. You have to start again if you want to integrate into this, which is a cracking shame there. Now, in its favour, I know you're only looking at 1 unit here, but all of the units in the 1, 2 or 3 pack are all identical. They've got the same hardware. It's not like when you see a lot of mesh routers at the moment, they're arriving with a kind of primary router that's kind of the all highfalutin model, and then the rest are node satellites with lower powered specs and connections. They are all identical. So when you are going for that box price of 1, 2 and 3 units, and it just goes up in $100 increments there, it makes a little bit more sense. And it does make it a little bit more better value when the 399 model has 3 of these bad boys in it, when the 199 model is just the 1. Now, on the subject of connections, I said I was going to touch on it there. If we look at the rear, there's only 2 connections for us to be getting on with there. And they're both Ethernet. One's a WAN and one's a LAN, or one of them's a WAN and LAN, I should say. But both of them are 1 gigabit Ethernet. Now that is a bloody shame. Why is that? Well, right now, getting a greater than gigabit, so that's greater than 100 megabyte internet connection, or 1000 megabit or 1 gigabit internet connection into a home or business is actually a lot easier these days than it's been for a long time. Fibre is pretty much universal. It's not everywhere, but every country has at least fibre support in one small or big way. And the result of that is that you can have internet speeds that are greater than a gigabit, which is a real cracking shame when your router is going to immediately bottleneck you. Now, what I mean by that is, when you're having your uploading and downloading, you're not going to be maxing out there. There's things like fair usage policy and different periods of the day, and no doubt a lot of ISPs with their greater than gigabit connections do highlight that, you know, there's wavy averages to bear in mind, but when you're using this and you're going to have multiple users connecting to it, you want to make sure that they are getting the best possible internet going into this device that they are divvying out between their connected users. This is particularly galling when you go into the specifics of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E and understand that the wireless connectivity that a person can have with this can potentially be 1.2 gigabits. Now, you have to factor in different bands, you have to factor in different distances, something we'll touch on in a moment. But the idea that a person can potentially have greater wireless connectivity than either of those physical ports, and it's capping me at the connection to my ISP if I've got greater than gigabit Ethernet connection, is a real crime to me at this price point, particularly when it's got Wi-Fi 6E and it's factoring in all of that future-proofing, but at the same time bottlenecking me in some important ways. Sorry to keep hitting the table. Now, bringing in, once again, that Amazon Eero that we talked about earlier on, and we will do a proper comparison of those coming up soon. That device, although more expensive, features a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port on it, 2.5 times the potential bandwidth of one of those ports. So the result is that that has already taken care of that wireless connectivity issue, either using it as your incoming WAN or utilizing it locally for a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connection, a connected cable-to-cable device, utilizing a network-attached storage device that's got that. The fact this has those 1 gigabit Ethernet ports is a crying shame to me. But let's talk a little bit more about Wi-Fi 6 on this device, because, Wi-Fi 6E on this device, because that's really, really important, because that's kind of the big sell, isn't it? The whole reason that a person should be going for this is because it's Wi-Fi 6E. Now remember, you don't have backwards compatibility. Remember, you don't have greater than gigabit Ethernet ports, so you're already sort of on a fence. So let's see and talk about Wi-Fi 6E on this device. So, and again, if you already know about Wi-Fi 6E, fast forward about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. But for those of you that aren't too au fait on it, bear with me. When it comes to wireless signals from any router, and I can point at any of the ones here in the studio, you have a few things to bear in mind. You have the frequencies there, which is kind of the whole radio depth of signal that signals can travel on. Then you have something called channels, and channels ultimately are an exchange with your router via those frequencies, and the depth of the channel will be 20 Hz, 40 Hz, 80 Hz, 160 megahertz, with Wi-Fi 7 trying to crack that into 320 megahertz. We'll get onto that later on. So when you are connecting with this device, the dream is to be connected to this device on using Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E on one of those 160 megahertz channels. Nice big block there. Now, the larger the frequency range of a router, the more of those 160 megahertz blocks you can fit. You've all seen the graphic online. So Wi-Fi 6E does a couple of things. Number one, it broadens the scope. So it allows not only for you to take advantage of the 5 gigahertz frequency for the most part, with exceptions that are reserved for governmental use, emergency services, transportation, stuff like that. It lets you use the full 5 gigahertz spectrum just like you could on most Wi-Fi 6 routers and indeed some Wi-Fi 5, but also opens up the 6 gigahertz frequency. Therefore, you can add more of those larger packet connections there. Now, this device is a tri-band router. It has 2.4 gigahertz, which is arcane but covers the most distance and has the lowest performance, with this device reported at 574 megabits per second maximum bandwidth on a 2.4 gigahertz frequency. And then there's a 5 gigahertz one, which is much faster, but has a lower range and wall penetration. And that one is reported at 2,404 megabits per second there potential. And then finally, you've got the 6 gigahertz, which is reported another 2,404 megabits per second there. So between that, you have got a router that is designed to cover a tremendous range of bandwidth there. But bear in mind, when you see a lot of people talking about this router and talking about AX 4200 or AX 5400, bear in mind it does really make a difference where you are in the world, because different radio frequencies are allowed and disabled for access in certain regions. When you hear people talking about routers going, oh, it's 2.4 gigabits per second there, so 420 megabits per second, yeah. That is maximum potential bandwidth. When you are connected with one device, be it a mobile phone, a laptop or whatever, you can only exchange one. Now there are ways and means to include that in dual band and co-band and stuff like that, but you are not going to maximize that full 4.2 gigabits per second potential on this router with one device. You'll be able to take a bit of it, 1.2 gigabits per second, and there are ways and means to crack it up to 2.4 with sophisticated network adapters, but that's about your lot. The idea is about a router that can cover as many individual devices as possible. Now this supports up to 100 active devices, and you can add another 100 with every node that you add to the system. Obviously, distance between nodes is going to make a big difference there. Physically, Google say it can cover 2,200 square feet. So again, there's a decent amount of distance there for this to cover physically, factoring in walls and such. But again, As impressive as the Wi-Fi 6 coverage is on this, and as impressive as the multi-range of full 1.2 gigabits per second connected devices can be with the help of the 6 gigahertz frequency on this device, I still can't get over that lack of a 2.5 gigabit or greater than gigabit Ethernet connection on the rear, and that lack of backwards compatibility, regardless of the good value price point, is something of a sticking point for me. But for now, we'd had a look at the glossy device. What we're going to do now is switch over, log into Google Home, and have a little look at the features and functions of this, as well as connecting with the device to get some idea about just how easy this bad boy is to use. So let's flick over to the screen. Okay, so I've set up the route for the first time, and as you can see there from the middle of the screen, we've got the Google Home app already installed, and we can make our way in. So as you can see there, I've not added any other devices to this. This is not a review of the Google Home app, although I'm sure there are lots of websites out there that will give that to you. We are mainly looking at the Wi-Fi. So this is the Wi-Fi point, utilizing that Wi-Fi, the Nest WiFi Pro. As you can see, I've not connected any other Wi-Fi node points to this. If I did, they'd be displayed here on screen. And again, we can run a quick speed test if we choose, but it is worth highlighting that I am connecting this router right now behind another router and utilizing a failover integrated cellular network there. So as you can see, Google has rated it as quote-unquote good. I mean, a lot of you may disagree with me on that internet connection, but again, that's nothing to do with the router. So right there, we've got that. Next thing we can do is go to the top right and have a little look at the individual settings there. We can see a lot of the information there on screen with regard to the device we're utilizing there and our localized identity. And from here, we can change a number of things. The top right really does give you very circumstantial stuff there. In the middle, we can change the brightness if we choose, and at the bottom we can configure a number of those Wi-Fi settings there. So we've already created that primary Wi-Fi network there with the password, and if we choose, we can go ahead and set up that family Wi-Fi, the one where we can pretty much configure which sites people can go to and not. So if we go through there, let's give this one a name. We're going to call this test. And then from there, go ahead. We're going to put rules on this device. If other devices are connected, they'll be ended there. So what we can do is choose whether we want to have only safe access. We're going to go with that there. This forces certain search engines, obviously including Google, to force safe search. You won't be able to deactivate it. Next, we'll go to the next option here, as that enables safe access on any device that we choose, in this case the mobile phone, this Pixel that I'm running on here that I showed you earlier on camera. I may fast forward, no we're not, we've got the scheduled pauses there, so we can choose if we want to create a schedule there which will restrict certain access. So we'll call this one test again, but we'll call this test schedule there, and go ahead and click next. And again, we can apply this to that group there we've already created and say that certain times a day, let's say 6 p.m, let's say on Monday to Friday, and we'll have that ending at around 5 a.m. every day for those connected devices. If we had kids or people that we don't want to have access to the internet at certain times, we can go ahead and do that. So again, fairly rudimentary stuff, nothing really too outspoken. Again, at least the app is a lot more I'm not going to say the old version wasn't intuitive, but I will say it was a little bit bloaty. So family Wi-Fi is activated there. What we can do if we've got guests, relatives, or if you've got staff members, we can go into that guest Wi-Fi connection there. Now, one thing I will add is this app isn't quite as responsive as I'd like. Anyone that's watched my Synology router coverage with the DS router application will know that one of the things I praised on that is how responsive it was. And given what we're connecting directly to this router, and you can ignore the airplane mode, I am connected to this router, I'm really surprised that the choices and the decisions and basically the response time is a little slower than I'd like. But as you can see, I've created that guest network. If I choose, I can say which devices are accessible or at least on the guest network. There's the Pixel Pro at the bottom. And that's really all you can configure there. Now, preferred activities allows you to have priority of service on certain things. So if you're a business user and you're running lots of things like Zooms, conference calls, you can go ahead and select that option, and this will change priorities so that if any device on the network is utilizing video streaming or video conferencing services, I should say, these will get priority. Alternatively, as you can see at the bottom, you can select a gaming setup where gaming streaming gets priority. Quite of a pain there. They've included Stadia, even though Google have kind of shut the door on Stadia as of about 3 weeks ago. Now, in the privacy settings, we can configure what Google has access to. This refers to something I mentioned earlier on about being in the Google ecosystem with this router. You're kind of locked in on that. It's very hard to have this router either on its own or as a mesh without having to kind of get in bed with Google a bit. And I know some of you may not be a fan of that, but at least you can change some of those privacy settings. Same goes for notifications, how much you want notifications on your primary device like this phone. As you can see there, when new devices join, so for example, if you get a notification that a new device has joined the router network, it gives you a notification where you can then assign them to those different groups, assign them to whether they're in that tight schedule, whether they got restricted or safe access. And there's lots of notification options there, but again, not enormously customizable. And then you've got the more advanced stuff here, where you'd want to configure, and again, most, I would argue, Google Mesh router users are not going to use these. I will argue at the top there, support of WPA3 there, as an option is going to be quite good, because WPA3, for all its security, can lower down some of those connections. Port management there at the bottom, if we go, we're just going to kind of pick this one, because there is only those 2 Gigabit Ethernet ports, which I did go on about being a bit disappointed, but at least you do have the option for port forwarding. And as you know, unsurprisingly, port forwarding is always going to be quite tough to simplify, even on Google here. So again, they have simplified it as much as they can, you know, to add the port open and external access ports there, but not a tremendous amount of flourish. I kind of would have liked to see something a little bit more graphical there. And then, of course, you've got the options with, say, the LAN connections and that WAN connection. You can get a lot of that identity stuff, but not really a great deal more than that. And obviously, these are settings that more network experience are going to be playing with there. But as you can see, there's not a tremendous amount you can play with on a single unit, and I would argue these are all still quite rudimentary things. And that's really it for the configuration of the router. It's straightforward. It's certainly better than the previous generation. And I would argue, you know, everything's a little clearer. Perhaps if I'd had more Wi-Fi nodes, we could have had a few extra options. But even in this limited scope, we can get a good understanding of the configuration that you can do via the app. And it, you know, it's not too overly complex, but I'm not going to say it's, you know, out of this world ambitious. And I think it's going to be a lot more about the support of Google Home in general that is really going to draw you into the Google ecosystem more than Google Home in conjunction with this router. So again, as far as router software goes, in of itself, not exactly out of this world, but as far as utilizing it in a wider AI home and IoT applications, probably a great deal more. Finally, I think it's worth talking about connectivity with this device. Now, my laptop that I have in the studio that I'm going to be using in tests in a video coming soon is utilizing a Wi-Fi 6E upgrade that I was able to apply for just £30. Hopefully there is a link in the description to my laptop Wi-Fi 6E upgrade video, which I recommend you check out. But if we scroll down here and then go into my network settings, and then from there go into this connection I have and scroll to the bottom, you're able to see there the transmission link. I am running on this mobile device at 1800 megabits per second with a receive link speed of 1921. That is a decent speed. Now, maybe if I use iPerf or something like that in a future video, we'll get a better understanding on the 6E connectivity. But as you can see on this Google 6 Pro, I am on the 6 gigahertz frequency there, and that is utilizing that WPA3. But it is just worth remembering while I'm doing this that if we were running a 6E device, it would open up that bandwidth even further. Remember, the difference between network is internal speed, whereas your internet connection is outside and you have less control over that. But that's really it for the software. Let's go to the end of this video, talk about what we liked and didn't like, and wrap things up. So what do we think? Well, let's say what we like about this router first. Obviously, if you are running a smart home setup, whether it is Google or taking advantage of some third-party ones out there, the fact that this supports Google Home and can be utilized in both Matter and Thread support means that this is going to be a multifunctional router to support a lot of your IoT services you've got knocking around. Also, we can't ignore the fact that it's Wi-Fi 6E. There aren't a lot of Wi-Fi 6E routers on the market, and certainly ones that are meshable at 3 nodes at that price point. This is probably one of the best value, only when you factor in the mesh, Wi-Fi 6E routers on the market right now, and it is painfully user-friendly to use there. On top of that, the support of the number of devices, 100 devices can be connected to this, and the fact that every node, which is identical in architecture, adds another 100, can't really be ignored. It makes it effectively limitless there in terms of the expansion of your network coverage. And the fact that you've got the tri-band setup on this is going to be great for that wireless backhaul there. Also, Google Home is still, it's better than it was in the first iterations of the Google Home app during my very first Google Wi-Fi reviews. It was all right, but it still felt very crafted and limited and a little bit bloaty when it came to some of the services it was throwing at you. I would say Google Home now has improved. It's still not as good as it can be, but it's definitely better than it was. It does still, the fact that I can't utilize a PC, a desktop, or a desktop client to configure this or manage this device, I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of that 1GB port on there. That really winds me up. The fact that it's not backwards compatible is another kick in the nadgers, I think, for a lot of users. I mean, if this is your first entry into Google Home setup, ignore all of that with regard to the backwards compatibility. In of itself, it's a great architecture as your first mesh smart home Wi-Fi. But if you're already in the Google ecosystem, which I think a lot of users of this video will be, you're going to be less keen on that. Also, outside of Wi-Fi 6E, this isn't a huge jump over its predecessors. And if you may have seen online, the previous generations of Google Wi-Fi have all seen a substantial price cut in the wave of this being released. So I do get the impression Google is cleaning house a little bit on their router series. So I'm not a huge fan of the idea that, not inclusive of Wi-Fi 6E, this doesn't bring a tremendous amount to the party on top of its predecessors. And finally, next year, 2023, is most likely when we're going to start to see the earliest commercial releases in Wi-Fi 7, taking advantage of higher density packets of channel data and a larger frequency to play with, and more and better handling of synchronous connections there. Now, things like, WPA3 support and higher, and a lot of the features and functions that we talked about today are going to be available on those routers next year, and they are going to be expensive. Really expensive. But I think it would be remiss not to highlight that if you are thinking of going for this in terms of future-proofing, next year we're probably going to see routers with Wi-Fi 7, which will affect the 6E pricing, and on top of that, better than Gigabit Ethernet connections on routers is pretty much going to have to be standard at that point. Otherwise, substantial bottlenecks are going to be everywhere. But overall, on the whole, I do like this router. I genuinely do. I just find that its architecture internally isn't as good as one would like in a refresh and an upgrade into Wi-Fi 6E, and the bottlenecks that are kind of limited around it in terms of that backwards compatibility, having to upgrade everything, and that less than Gigabit Ethernet port there, I think those are in conflict with the future-proofing nature of the rest of this setup in terms of the mesh pack, in terms of Wi-Fi 6E and more. I like this router, but it is not as good as I hoped it would be in terms of what you're getting for the money. If you get it for less than the price they're rating at the moment, go for it. But if you're already running a Google Home setup, I would stay with your setup for now without integrating this. Stick with what you got going there, because I do think something better will come within the next year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, visit the link in the description over to NAS Compares. We've done a full written review of this, and we'll be updating the software portion of those reviews very, very soon. But the rest of it is completely detailed there, along with comparisons against the Amazon Eero, and lots of information on how this compares with the older gen, and Wi-Fi 6E benefits too. So do check those out. Visit the links in the description to the help and guides on a number of subjects in today's video, along with the free advice section over on NAS Compares and the free community forum, Ask NAS Compares, and if you want to learn more or have any questions, you can use those channels there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you enjoyed it, helps you know what I'm doing right. Click subscribe if you want to learn more, and other than that, I will see you next time.